Tonight we're diving into a place where every breath you take is measured, every word you speak is calculated, and every single movement could be your last mistake. Forget everything you've seen in movies about prison life, the Hollywood dramatizations with their noble inmates and redemption arcs, because I'm about to show you why you, yes, you sitting there in your comfortable home, wouldn't survive even a single day behind the walls of a maximum security prison. Picture this. It's 4:30 in the morning and you're jolted awake not by your gentle phone alarm, but by the soul-crushing metallic clang of steel doors opening simultaneously across an entire cell block, a sound so violently loud it feels like someone's taking a sledgehammer directly to your skull. You're not in your bed anymore. You're on a thin mattress that's maybe 2 inches thick, compressed down to nothing after decades of use, lying on a metal rack bolted to a concrete wall in a cell that measures exactly 6 feet by 9 feet, smaller than most people's bathrooms, and you're sharing this claustrophobic coffin with another human being who's been convicted of crimes you don't even want to imagine. The smell hits you immediately, a nauseating cocktail of industrial disinfectant failing miserably to mask decades of human sweat, the metallic tang of old plumbing, and something else, something primal and threatening that you can't quite identify, but that makes every primitive instinct in your body scream danger. Your cellmate, we'll call him Tank because that's genuinely what the 260-pound former enforcer for a drug cartel goes by, is already awake, has been for an hour actually, doing push-ups in the 3 feet of floor space between your bunks, and he hasn't acknowledged your existence once since you arrived yesterday, which is actually a good thing, because acknowledgement means engagement, and engagement in here means you've entered into the social ecosystem of the prison, and trust me, you don't want that. Not yet. Not ever if you can help it. The fluorescent lights flicker on, harsh and unforgiving, revealing every crack in the painted cinder block walls, every stain on the stainless steel toilet that sits less than 3 feet from where you sleep. No privacy, no dignity, just you and your bodily functions on full display to someone who might decide at any moment that you've looked at him wrong. You have exactly 15 minutes to get yourself together before the count, the first of 6 daily head counts where you stand at your cell door to be visually confirmed as still alive and accounted for. Because in maximum security, they need to know where every single body is at all times, not for your safety, but for theirs, for the system's, for the maintenance of order in a place where chaos is always bubbling just beneath the surface. Your hands are shaking as you splash water on your face from the tiny sink, the water coming out in weak spurts that are either freezing cold or scalding hot with no in-between, no temperature control, no comfort settings, because comfort is a luxury that belongs to your old life, the one you kissed goodbye the moment those transport chains were locked around your wrists and ankles. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe so you'll always know when a new one is uploaded. And I'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're listening from and what time of day it is for you. The reality of maximum security prison time starts settling into your bones during that first breakfast. And let me tell you, everything you thought you knew about institutional food is about to be shattered like glass under a boot heel. You're herded into a cafeteria that holds roughly 400 inmates, all of them moving through an unspoken choreography of territorial boundaries and invisible lines that you cannot see, but everyone else navigates with the precision of dancers who've rehearsed this routine 1,000 times. The room itself is designed for surveillance, not comfort, with cameras in every corner, guards stationed on an elevated walkway that runs the perimeter, and tables bolted to the floor in neat rows that allow clear sight lines and minimal hiding spots. You grab your tray, a molded plastic thing divided into sections like an elementary school lunch tray, and the server, another inmate doing his kitchen duty assignment, slops onto it what can only generously be described as food, a gray substance claiming to be oatmeal, 2 pieces of white bread that have the texture of foam rubber, a bruised apple that's more brown than red, and something yellow that might be eggs but has the consistency of wet concrete. The caloric count is calculated to the exact minimum required to keep a human body functioning, nothing more, because feeding you well costs money, and you are now a line item in a budget, a number in a system that profits from your captivity, whether through state funding or private contracts, depending on which type of facility you landed in. You stand there holding your tray, scanning for somewhere to sit, and this is where your first critical mistake happens, because you don't know the seating arrangements. You don't know that the table by the east wall belongs to the Aryan Brotherhood, that the section near the serving line is controlled by the Mexican Mafia, that the tables by the windows are split between various black gangs who've negotiated a tense territorial agreement, and the scattered seats in the middle, those belong to the unaffiliated, the vulnerable, the prey. You pick a random empty spot at a half-full table, you sit down, and the conversation around you dies immediately, like someone hit a mute button on the world. The 3 men who are sitting there stand up without a word, carry their trays to another table, and leave you sitting alone in a space that suddenly feels radioactive. A guard notices, smirks, makes a note on his clipboard. Because your isolation has just been publicly established, you've been marked as someone without protection, without affiliation, without value in the complex prison economy. You try to eat the oatmeal, force the spoon to your mouth, but your throat has closed up from stress, and the food tastes like salted cardboard mixed with despair. Across the cafeteria, you notice people watching you, not obviously, but with those sideways glances that predators use to track prey, calculating, assessing, measuring you for weaknesses. An older inmate, maybe 60 years old, with arms covered in faded prison tattoos, catches your eye and gives you the smallest shake of his head, a warning, but a warning about what you have no idea. The 15 minutes allotted for breakfast feel like 15 hours and 15 seconds simultaneously. Time moving in that strange elastic way it does when you're terrified, stretching out the agony while simultaneously rushing you toward whatever horror comes next. You dump your mostly uneaten food into the trash, stack your tray, and follow the crowd back toward the cell blocks, trying to make yourself invisible, trying to blend in, but you stick out like a soprano in a bass choir, your fear practically radiating off you in visible waves. The walk back takes you through a corridor where the paint is peeling off the walls in long strips, revealing layers of previous colors beneath decades of institutional beige and gray and green, archaeological strata of despair, and your footsteps echo off the concrete floor in a rhythm that sounds like a countdown, tick, 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 towards something inevitable. By mid-morning, you're learning what it really means to do time in maximum security, and the psychological warfare is so much worse than any physical threat you've imagined. You've been assigned to your work detail, because idle hands are dangerous hands in a place where men have nothing but time to plan violence. So the system keeps everyone busy with jobs that pay between 12 cents and 40 cents per hour. Wages that would be illegal anywhere else, but are perfectly legal here because the 13th Amendment specifically allows slavery as punishment for crime, a fact that feels a lot less abstract when you're the one being told you'll be cleaning toilets for a quarter a day. Your assignment is laundry duty, which sounds simple until you understand the reality. You'll be working in a room that's 120 degrees because of the industrial dryers running constantly. handling sheets and uniforms that are stained with every bodily fluid imaginable, operating machinery that's decades old and missing safety guards because maintenance budgets were cut years ago, and you'll be doing this for 8 hours with one 15-minute break and a guard who watches you like you're planning an escape through the washing machine. The other inmates on your detail have been doing this for years, moving with the efficient economy of motion that comes from endless repetition, and they don't speak to you, don't acknowledge you, treat you like you're invisible because to them you basically are. You're either going to die, get transferred, or join a gang for protection within a month. So investing in learning your name is pointless. You grab an armful of soiled linens from the intake bin, and the smell nearly knocks you over. A combination of sweat, urine, and something sickly sweet that you realize with horror is probably blood. And you have to fight down the vomit rising in your throat because showing weakness here, showing that you can't handle the work, marks you as soft. The concrete floor is perpetually wet from overflow and steam condensation, slippery with a film of detergent and whatever gets tracked in on boots, and you watch another inmate slip and nearly crack his skull on the edge of an industrial sink, and nobody stops working, nobody helps. They just step around him as he gets back up, because that's the culture here. You handle your own problems or you go down. The noise is incredible, a constant roar of water and machinery and metal clanging that makes conversation impossible, which is probably by design, because conversations lead to planning and planning leads to problems for the administration. You're loading sheets into a washing machine, your hands already raw from the industrial detergent, when you feel someone standing too close behind you, violating that personal space bubble that society pretends matters, but that doesn't exist in here. You turn and there's a guy, maybe 30 years old, covered in gang tattoos that you don't recognize, and he's smiling at you, but it's not a friendly smile, it's the smile a cat gives a mouse before the pounce. He leans in close, so close you can smell the instant coffee on his breath. And he says the first words anyone has directly spoken to you since you arrived. You got people? 2 words that contain an entire threat assessment. A question about whether you have gang affiliation, family connections, anyone who will retaliate if something happens to you, and your answer right now determines whether you're going to make it through this first day intact or whether you're about to become a statistic. You freeze, your mind racing through possible responses, knowing that saying yes when you don't have protection will lead to verification and exposure as a liar, but saying no is admitting you're vulnerable, you're alone, you're available for exploitation in any number of horrifying ways. The education you're receiving in prison politics happens faster than any college course, compressed into moments of pure survival instinct, where one wrong word can cost you everything. You mumble something non-committal to the tattooed inmate, something that's neither yes nor no, and his smile widens like you've just confirmed exactly what he suspected. He pats you on the shoulder, a gesture that looks almost friendly to the guard watching from the doorway, but that you can feel as a claim, a marking, a promise of future attention that makes your skin crawl. He walks away and you're left shaking, your hands gripping the edge of the washing machine so hard your knuckles go white, trying to process what just happened, trying to understand the layers of meaning in an interaction that lasted maybe 15 seconds, but that has potentially determined the trajectory of your entire incarceration. The rest of the work shift passes in a blur of heat and noise and repetitive motion, loading and unloading and folding, your body going through the motions while your mind spins in circles, trying to figure out survival strategies with absolutely zero information about how this place actually works. You see hierarchies playing out around you, the subtle ways that certain inmates give orders and others follow, the complex system of debts and favors and obligations that governs every interaction, the underground economy where everything from cigarettes to protection to sexual favors gets traded like currency in a marketplace that operates in plain sight of guards who either don't care or are actively participating. There's a white guy in the corner, maybe 60 years old, who's been in for so long that he moves through the laundry like he owns it. And you notice that everyone, regardless of their gang affiliation, gives him space, respects his territory, and you wonder what he did to earn that status, what violence or reputation precedes him that even the young, aggressive inmates defer to his presence. Lunch comes and you're marched back to the cafeteria, the same ritual as breakfast, but with different food that's equally inedible. Today it's some kind of mystery meat that's gray and gristly, swimming in watery gravy, instant mashed potatoes that taste like wallpaper paste, and green beans that have been boiled into submission until they're gray. You grab your tray, and this time you know better than to sit randomly. You head for the tables in the middle section where the unaffiliated sit, the no man's land of the prison social structure, and you find a seat at the end of a table where two other guys are eating in silence. They glance at you, assess you in that quick calculating way that everyone does in here, and then ignore you, which is the best outcome you could hope for. You eat mechanically, forcing down the calories, because you understand now that food is fuel, and you don't know when your body might need that energy for fighting or running or enduring, whatever comes next. The cafeteria is quieter than breakfast, the initial energy of the day replaced by a grinding exhaustion that comes from pointless labor and constant vigilance. You notice an inmate at a nearby table staring at you. Not the quick assessment glance, but a sustained stare that's meant to intimidate, meant to make you uncomfortable, and you make the mistake of staring back, trying to show you're not weak, trying to establish that you won't be pushed around, and you see his expression change from curiosity to something darker, something that looks like pleasure at finding resistance. A toy that fights back is more fun to break. The afternoon recreation period is where the true nature of maximum security reveals itself in all its brutal glory, and you're about to understand why the guards call it gladiator school. The yard is a rectangle of cracked asphalt surrounded by 30-foot walls topped with razor wire that glints in the sunlight like silver teeth. Guard towers at each corner with armed officers who have authorization to shoot anyone who approaches the perimeter, and a few hundred men with nothing to do but lift weights, play basketball, walk in circles, and plot violence. You step out into the sunlight, the first natural light you've seen since arrival, and it should feel liberating, but instead it feels exposing, like stepping into an arena where you're the entertainment. The yard has its own geography, its own territorial divisions that are even more strictly enforced than the cafeteria. The weight pile belongs to the white gangs. The basketball courts are controlled by the black gangs. The far corner near the education building is where the Mexicans congregate, and the track that runs along the perimeter is neutral ground where anyone can walk, but where the most dangerous predators hunt. You start walking, trying to look purposeful, trying to project confidence you absolutely don't feel, and you're hyper-aware of every person you pass, every group huddled in conversation, every set of eyes that tracks your movement across the yard. The noise is different out here. No machinery, just the sound of weights clanging, basketballs hitting asphalt, men calling to each other in a mix of English and Spanish and slang that might as well be foreign languages, and underneath it all a current of tension that feels like electricity before a storm. You complete one lap of the track and you're already exhausted, not from physical exertion, but from the mental effort of maintaining awareness, scanning for threats, trying to appear neither weak nor aggressive, walking that impossible line between victim and challenger. On your second lap, 3 inmates fall into step beside you, matching your pace, boxing you in, and your heart rate spikes because you know this is intentional, this is coordinated, this is the moment you've been dreading since you arrived. The one in the middle is the same guy from the laundry, the one who asked if you had people, and his 2 companions are slightly behind him. Enforcers, muscle, there to make sure this conversation goes the way he wants it to go. He starts talking, his voice friendly, almost casual, asking where you're from, what you're in for, how long you're looking at, all the standard questions that sound innocent but are actually intelligence gathering, building a profile, identifying weaknesses and leverage points. You answer carefully, trying to give information without revealing anything useful, but you're not good at this game. You're playing chess against someone who's been playing for years while you barely know how the pieces move. He gets to the point, tells you that you need protection, that the yard is dangerous for someone alone, that there are people who would hurt you just for entertainment, and he can make sure that doesn't happen. He can keep you safe. All you have to do is agree to certain terms, perform certain services, accept certain obligations that he describes in vague terms that somehow make them sound even more threatening. You ask what kind of services, and his smile gets wider, shows teeth, and he says it depends on what skills you have, what you can offer. Maybe you're good with numbers and can help with bookkeeping for their commissary business. Maybe you're good with your hands and can help with other things. Maybe you're good with your mouth and can help with whatever they need. The implications landing like punches to your gut. The decision you make in this moment will define everything that follows. Every day of your sentence, stretching out ahead of you like an infinite corridor of identical cells, and you understand with sudden clarity that there are no good options here, only gradations of terrible. You tell him you need time to think about it, trying to buy yourself space, trying to delay the inevitable, and you watch his expression shift, the friendly mask slipping just enough to show the predator underneath. And he says, sure, you can think about it, you have until tomorrow, but think carefully because his protection offer has an expiration date. And after that, you'll be on your own. And he really wouldn't recommend that. Not for someone like you, someone soft, someone who doesn't know how things work in here. They leave you alone and you complete the rest of recreation period in a daze, your mind spinning through impossible scenarios, trying to find an exit that doesn't exist, because you understand. Now, that prison isn't just about being locked up. It's about navigating a parallel society with its own rules and hierarchies and power structures. Except this society has no safety net, no police to call, no authority that will genuinely protect you because the guards are outnumbered 40-1 and they know it. Their job is to maintain basic order, not to protect individual inmates from each other. That's your problem, your responsibility, your impossible task. You head back inside when the bell rings, following the crowd through metal detectors that beep randomly because the sensitivity is turned up so high that belt buckles and metal buttons set them off, leading to random pat-downs where guards run their hands over your body with a thoroughness that would be sexual assault anywhere else but is standard procedure here, another small degradation in a day full of degradations. Evening count happens at 5 p.m., everyone locked in their cells while guards walk the tiers confirming bodies. And you stand at your cell door next to Tank, who still hasn't spoken to you, hasn't acknowledged your existence, and you wonder if that's mercy or cruelty, whether being invisible to your cellmate is protection or just another form of isolation. Dinner is the same ritual, the same inedible food. Tonight it's some kind of pasta in red sauce that tastes like ketchup mixed with sand. And you sit at your claimed spot at the loser table and you eat mechanically fuel for a body you're not sure you want to keep fueling. And you notice that the guy who was staring at you during lunch is nowhere to be seen. And you don't know if that's good or bad, if his absence means he's lost interest, or if he's planning something that requires him to be elsewhere, establishing an alibi for whatever's coming. The evening is free time, supposedly. A few hours where you can watch television in the day room or use the phones to call approved contacts, or just sit in your cell and contemplate the ruins of your life. And you choose the cell because at least there you have walls on 3 sides and you can see the door. You can see threats coming. Tank is doing push-ups again, his routine apparently unbreakable. And you lie on your bunk staring at the concrete ceiling where previous occupants have scratched messages and dates and names, creating a palimpsest of despair, layers of human suffering compressed into graffiti that the prison doesn't bother to paint over because what's the point? It'll just come back. Prisoners have infinite time and limited outlets, and marking territory is a fundamental human impulse. You think about your family, your friends, your life before, and it feels like remembering someone else's existence. Someone who died and left you wearing his body, trapped in his consequences, paying for his mistakes with a coin you don't have enough of. Years, decades potentially, of this same day repeating with minor variations. A hell of repetition and degradation and constant threat. Night falls and the prison transforms into something even more dangerous than the daytime version, because darkness brings opportunity for violence that the cameras can't quite catch and the guards can't quite prevent. The lights in the cell don't turn off completely. They dim to a sickly yellow glow that's just bright enough to prevent total darkness, but not bright enough to actually see clearly. A twilight state that makes shadows deeper and every sound more threatening. You're lying on your bunk, exhausted but unable to sleep, your body tense with adrenaline that has nowhere to go, listening to the sounds of the cell block settling into night, the coughs and snores and whispered conversations, the occasional shout or laugh that echoes off concrete and steel, the footsteps of guards doing their rounds, their flashlights cutting through cell bars in sweeping arcs that illuminate and then abandon each space in turn. Tank is finally still, lying on the bottom bunk, and you can hear his breathing, deep and regular, the sleep of someone who's been doing this so long it's become normal, someone who's adapted to this environment in ways you hope you never will, because adaptation means accepting this as reality, means letting go of the person you were and becoming whoever you need to be to survive. And you're not ready for that transformation, not ready to look at yourself and see a stranger looking back. Around midnight, you hear something that makes your blood freeze, the sound of a cell door opening somewhere on your tier, the metallic slide of a lock being defeated. And you know that shouldn't be possible. The cells are controlled electronically from a central station. They don't just open unless someone has paid someone or someone has access they shouldn't, or someone has been waiting for exactly this moment when the guard rotation puts the newest, youngest, least experienced officer on this tier. You hear footsteps, multiple people moving with purpose, and you hear a cell door slide shut again, and then nothing. Silence, so complete. It's worse than any sound, because your imagination fills that silence with horrors, and then you hear it, a scream, muffled like someone has a hand over the person's mouth, and thumping sounds, and low voices giving commands. And you know what's happening. You know that someone is being victimized right now, maybe 20 feet from where you're lying, and there's nothing you can do. You can't help, you can't intervene, You can barely breathe because drawing attention to yourself right now would be suicide. So you lie there frozen, listening to someone else's nightmare, understanding that this could be you tomorrow or next week or whenever the people who run this place decide it's your turn. The sounds stop eventually. The footsteps retreat. The cell door opens and closes again, and silence returns, thick and accusatory. And you're shaking, your whole body trembling with fear and rage and helplessness. And Tank shifts on his bunk below you and says his first words to you, "Welcome to Max." Just that, 2 words in a tone that's neither kind nor cruel, just factual, a statement of reality. And then his breathing returns to that deep, regular rhythm, and you're alone again with your thoughts and your terror and the understanding that you have at least 364 more nights like this stretching ahead of you, assuming you survive that long. Day 2 starts exactly like day 1, the same brutal awakening at 4:30 a.m., the same rush to get ready before count. But everything feels different now because you understand the stakes. You've moved from abstract fear to concrete knowledge of what this place actually is. Your body aches from tension, from lying rigid all night, from the terrible mattress and the cold that seeps up from the concrete floor through the thin blanket. And when you look in the metal mirror above the sink, your reflection shows someone who's aged years in 24 hours, eyes hollow, face drawn, the beginning of that prison pallor that comes from fluorescent lights and no real sunlight and constant stress that grinds away at your cellular level. Breakfast is the same tasteless ritual, and you sit at the same table and the same people ignore you, but now you notice details you missed before, the way that inmate at the corner table has a black eye that wasn't there yesterday, the way 2 men sit with their backs to each other at the same table, which you now understand means they're in conflict, but a conflict that's being managed through official channels, probably mediation by gang leadership to prevent violence that would bring lockdowns that hurt everyone's business. The guy from yesterday, the one who offered you protection, catches your eye from across the cafeteria and taps his wrist, where a watch would be if watches were allowed, a gesture that means time's running out. Decision time is coming, and you feel your appetite, already minimal, completely disappear. Work detail is the same hellish heat and noise, but today you're more alert to the social dynamics. You watch how favors get traded, how someone does extra work for someone else in exchange for something. Commissary items, probably, or drugs, or debts forgiven. Everything is currency in here. Everything has value, including you, especially you. Fresh meat with no protection is valuable to different people for different reasons, all of them bad for you. During the morning shift, you witness your first fight. 2 inmates who've been shooting each other looks across the laundry room suddenly explode into violence. Fists and improvised weapons, a lock and a sock, swinging with bone-crushing force. And it's over in seconds, guards responding with pepper spray and batons. Both inmates dragged off to segregation while the rest of you keep working, because stopping work means you're involved, means you're complicit, means you catch charges too. The violence is shocking in its intensity and its casualness, the way everyone just accepts it as part of the routine, the way the work supervisor just notes it on his clipboard and calls for 2 replacements from the standby list. Inmates are interchangeable parts in the machine. You break one, you swap in another. No real consequence except to the individuals who just earned themselves months in solitary confinement and additional charges that extend their sentences. Lunch brings another confrontation. You're sitting, eating your mystery meat when the staring guy from yesterday finally makes his move, sits down directly across from you uninvited, and he's got friends with him, 3 other inmates who box you in, and he starts talking, asking if you've got money on your books, meaning commissary account, asking if you've got family who can send money, and you realize this is a shakedown, this is extortion. They want you to become a revenue stream, a piggy bank they can crack open whenever they need funds. And if you say, no, you don't have money, they won't believe you. And if you say, yes, you do have money, you've just confirmed you're worth robbing. The economics of prison life are predatory in ways that would make payday lenders blush, and you're learning the hard way that everything costs something here, safety most of all. The guy across from you learn his name is Cortez, lays out the situation with the blunt clarity of someone who's had this conversation 100 times before. He explains that in maximum security you have 3 choices. You can join a gang, which means following orders that might include violence against people you don't know for reasons you don't understand. You can pay for protection, which means regular tribute in the form of commissary items or money deposits or favors. Or you can go it alone, which means you're fair game for anyone who wants to take from you, hurt you, use you, and the guards won't help because they can't be everywhere and they've got their own problems. And honestly, they probably think you deserve whatever happens because you're a criminal. You're in here for a reason. And suffering is part of the punishment. Cortez tells you his rate, $20 a week in commissary credit. Pretty reasonable, actually, compared to some of the other protection rackets running in the yard. And for that, you get left alone. Nobody touches you. Nobody takes your stuff. Nobody makes you uncomfortable. And all you have to do is make sure his account stays funded. And maybe occasionally you help out with small tasks. Nothing major. Just passing messages or holding something for him temporarily or looking the other way when certain things happen. Easy stuff. Simple stuff. The kind of cooperation that keeps the system running smooth. You want to say no. Every fiber of your being rebels against giving in to extortion, against funding whatever criminal enterprise he's running from inside these walls. But you look at his eyes and you see that this isn't a negotiation. This is a courtesy. He's telling you the price before. He just takes what he wants. And the alternative to paying is violence, immediate and severe, the kind of beating that puts you in the infirmary for weeks, that marks you as a victim, that opens you up to every other predator in the facility who sees that you can be hurt without consequence. You hear yourself agreeing, your voice sounding distant and defeated, and Cortez smiles, genuine pleasure at another successful acquisition, and he shakes your hand like you've just concluded a business deal, which in a sense you've just entered into a contract where you pay indefinitely and receive only the absence of harm in return, a protection racket that's as old as civilization itself, just operating in a pressure cooker environment where the normal rules don't apply and violence is always simmering just below the surface. The rest of lunch passes in a haze. You're processing what just happened, calculating how much money you have on your books, how long it will last at $20 a week, wondering what happens when you run out, whether the protection evaporates the moment you can't pay, whether you've just bought yourself a temporary reprieve or actually secured some measure of safety in this place. Recreation period arrives and you walk the yard with new eyes. Now that you've paid for protection, you're trying to figure out what exactly you've bought, whether Cortez has the power he claims, whether his word actually means anything to the various predators circling the weak and vulnerable. You complete your laps and nobody bothers you, nobody falls into step beside you, and you wonder if that's because word has already spread that you're under Cortez's protection, or if you're just lucky today, if tomorrow will bring new challenges, new threats, new impossible choices between bad options and worse options. 3 days in and you're starting to understand the rhythm of this place, The way time moves differently when every day is identical to the last and you have no control over any aspect of your existence. You wake, you count, you eat, you work, you eat, you recreate, you eat, you lock down, you try to sleep, repeat, 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 days bleeding into each other until you lose track of what day it is, what month it is, whether you've been here a week or a year, your whole life becoming a fairy tale you tell yourself to stay sane. A story about someone who lived in a place where doors weren't locked, where choices existed, where privacy was a right, not a forgotten luxury. The psychological toll is worse than the physical conditions, worse than the bad food and uncomfortable bed and constant noise, because your mind starts to adapt in ways you don't want. You catch yourself thinking in prison logic, evaluating everything through the lens of survival and threat assessment, measuring people by their capacity for violence, calculating the angles and alliances that might keep you safe, becoming the kind of person who can watch someone get beaten and feel only relief that it's not you, and you hate what you're becoming, but you can't stop it. Can't maintain your old self in an environment that punishes softness and rewards brutality. You're learning the language, the slang and code words that let inmates communicate under the guards' noses. You're learning to read the subtle signals that indicate mood shifts and brewing conflicts. You're learning which guards can be reasoned with and which ones are just doing time themselves, collecting a paycheck in an environment they hate as much as you do, probably going home at night to drink away the memory of spending 8 hours in a cage with people society has decided to forget. Your cellmate Tank finally speaks to you beyond those 2 words. On the first night, he gives you advice in short, brutal sentences, tells you not to borrow anything from anyone because everything comes with interest, tells you not to gamble because you'll lose and then you'll owe, and owing in prison is a debt that gets collected in ways you don't want to experience, tells you to keep your eyes down and your mouth shut and your hands to yourself, tells you that the shower is the most dangerous place in the facility because it's the only space with blind corners and steam that obscures the cameras and noise from the water that covers sounds. Tells you to shower during mainline when the block is mostly empty rather than during peak times when predators hunt. You thank him for the advice and he shrugs, says he doesn't care if you live or die, but having a cellmate who gets victimized brings attention to the cell and he likes his privacy, so staying safe is in his interest too. Everything is transactional here. Even basic human decency comes with a cost-benefit analysis attached. The days continue and you settle into a kind of numb acceptance, not quite giving up but not fighting either, just existing in a state of suspended animation where the past is gone and the future is unimaginable and the present is something to be endured rather than lived. And you understand why so many people come out of maximum security completely destroyed, their personalities erased, their humanity ground down to nothing by the relentless dehumanizing machinery of incarceration. Because this isn't correction, this isn't rehabilitation, this is just suffering, pure and simple, punishment without purpose, vengeance without end. Week 2 begins and you're introduced to the mail system, which sounds innocent until you understand that every piece of correspondence is opened, read, censored, and potentially used against you by the authorities who control every aspect of your existence. You receive your first letter from home, from your mother who doesn't understand what this place is really like, who writes cheerful updates about the weather and the neighbors and the dog, asking how you're doing as if you're at summer camp instead of locked in a concrete box with violent felons, and you want to write back telling her the truth, describing the fear and degradation and constant threat, but you know that letter would be read by staff, potentially shared with other inmates if it falls into the wrong hands, used as evidence of weakness or emotional vulnerability. So instead you write back the same kind of bland reassurance, telling her you're fine, The food is okay. You're keeping your head down. Everything is manageable. Lies that protect both of you from a reality neither of you can change. The commissary system becomes your lifeline and your curse. The ability to buy small comforts like soap that doesn't strip your skin, toothpaste that doesn't taste like poison, instant coffee that makes the morning slightly more bearable. But every purchase depletes your account, brings you closer to the moment when you can't make Cortez's protection payment, when the safety you've bought evaporates and you're back to being vulnerable prey. You learn to budget with the precision of an accountant, calculating exactly how much you can spend on comfort versus how much you need to reserve for survival. And you start to understand why some inmates turn to the underground economy, selling drugs or sex or violence, anything to generate the income needed to maintain their position in the prison hierarchy, because money is power here, more than size or strength or fighting ability. Money buys protection and privilege and the small mercies that make this existence slightly less unbearable. You witness your first stabbing during rec time. Two inmates who've been circling each other for days finally collide in an explosion of violence. A sharpened piece of metal that used to be a bed frame finding its way into someone's abdomen with practiced precision, and the victim goes down hard, blood spreading across the asphalt in a dark pool that seems impossible to have come from one human body, and the guards respond with alarm sirens and tactical teams, and the whole yard gets locked down. Everyone forced to lie face down on the ground, with hands visible while they secure the scene. And you're lying there with your cheek pressed against asphalt that's still warm from the afternoon sun, breathing in dust and watching ants crawl past your face. And you realize that the violence you just witnessed is the violence that's always possible, always brewing, always one insult or debt or perceived slight away from erupting. And no amount of money you pay Cortez can protect you from random violence, from being in the wrong place when tensions explode, from becoming collateral damage in someone else's war. The lockdown lasts for 6 hours, everyone confined to cells while the administration investigates. And you sit in your cell with Tank, who's reading a worn paperback novel, completely unbothered by the disruption because he's seen this movie 100 times before, and you marvel at his ability to just accept this as normal, to not be affected by the fact that someone might be dying in the infirmary right now, that the violence could have targeted anyone, that tomorrow it might be him or you bleeding out on the yard while people step over your body to avoid getting involved. The shower situation is exactly as dangerous as Tank warned you it would be, and you learn this lesson the hard way when you make the mistake of showering during evening rush, when the block is crowded and the steam is thick and the guards are changing shifts and nobody's really paying attention. You're soaping up, trying to wash quickly and get out, when you feel someone enter your shower stall, the curtain pushed aside, and before you can react there are hands on you, rough and demanding, and a voice telling you not to make noise, not to fight, just cooperate, and it'll be over quick, and your mind goes blank with terror. Every self-defense instinct you have firing at once, but your body frozen, unable to process what's happening, unable to formulate a response beyond pure panic. You do fight, you thrash and swing, and your elbow connects with something solid and you hear a grunt of pain, and then you're shoved hard against the tile wall, your face smashing into the concrete with enough force to split your lip, and you taste blood mixing with shower water, and the hands are back, more aggressive now, punishing you for resistance, and you're about to be violated in ways you can't even think about, when suddenly the pressure releases, the hands disappear, and you hear Tank's voice, low and dangerous, telling someone to back the fuck off, that you're with him. Touching you means going through him, and apparently Tank has enough reputation that this threat means something, because You hear footsteps retreating, muttered curses, and then Tank is telling you to finish your shower and get back to the cell. His tone making it clear this isn't a rescue born of friendship, but annoyance that his cellmate's problems are becoming his problems. You finish washing with shaking hands, blood from your split lip swirling down the drain. And when you get back to the cell, Tank doesn't mention what happened, doesn't ask if you're okay, just tells you that you now owe him, that he's spent reputation capital protecting you, and that debt will need to be repaid somehow, someday, when he needs something from you. And you understand that even kindness in this place comes with strings attached, that there are no free favors, no pure altruism. Everything is transactional and everyone is keeping score. The split lip swells up and bruises, and for the next week you walk around with visible evidence of victimization, a mark that tells everyone you're vulnerable, you can be touched, and the only thing preventing further attacks is Tank's claimed ownership, which makes you property instead of prey but doesn't make you safe. Not really, because Tank's protection extends only as far as his interests align with yours, and the moment helping you costs him more than it benefits him, you'll be on your own again. You start to understand the concept of prison politics in deeper ways, the complex web of alliances and enmities that govern every interaction, the way that gangs aren't just criminal organizations but survival structures, providing protection and identity and purpose in an environment designed to strip all three away, and you understand why people join them despite the requirements of violence and loyalty. Because the alternative is isolation, vulnerability, becoming a victim in a place where victims don't last long. Month 1 ends and you realize you've stopped counting days, stopped marking time, started thinking in terms of indefinite present tense. This is your life now, not a temporary punishment, but a permanent condition, at least for the foreseeable future, which stretches out ahead of you like a desert with no horizon. You've lost weight, the combination of stress and inadequate nutrition stripping pounds off your frame, your clothes hanging loose, your face gaunt, and when you catch your reflection, you barely recognize yourself. The person staring back looks haunted, looks older, looks like someone who's seen things they can't unsee, and you suppose that's accurate because you've witnessed violence and degradation and human cruelty in its purest form, stripped of all the social niceties that make civilization possible. The routine has become automatic, your body moving through the daily schedule without conscious thought, muscle memory carrying you from count to chow to work to rec to lockdown, and you realize this is how people do decades. They stop fighting the routine, stop resisting the system, just let it carry them along like a river current, going where it takes them because swimming against it is exhausting and ultimately pointless. You've made a few tentative connections with other inmates, not friendships exactly, but nodding acquaintances, guys who recognize you from work detail or the yard, who acknowledge your existence without threatening it, and these tiny human connections feel precious in an environment that's designed to prevent solidarity, to keep everyone isolated and suspicious and turned against each other, because united inmates are dangerous inmates, capable of organizing, capable of resistance, and the system can't allow that. You learn about the appeals process, the Byzantine legal system that theoretically allows you to challenge your conviction but practically requires legal knowledge you don't have and resources you can't access.
And you watch other inmates spend years filing motions that get rejected with form letters, chasing hope that's always just out of reach.
And you have to decide whether to join them in that pursuit or accept your sentence and just do the time. And neither option feels right. Both feel like different forms of surrender. The guards remain a constant presence, but you've learned they're not a monolith. Some are professionals just doing a job, maintaining order without excessive force, treating inmates like humans who made mistakes rather than animals who need to be punished, while others clearly get off on the power, enjoy the dominance, use their authority to humiliate and degrade. And learning to tell the difference is crucial because approaching the wrong guard with a question or complaint can result in retaliation that makes your life even more miserable. You witness the effects of long-term incarceration on the men around you, guys who've been down for 10, 15, 20 years, who've become so institutionalized they can't function any other way, who've forgotten how to make decisions, who panic at the thought of release because prison is all they know. It's become home in the most twisted sense, the bars and rules and routine providing structure that the outside world lacks, and you see your future in their present, see what you might become if you let this place reshape you completely. The violence escalates in unpredictable waves, periods of relative calm shattered by eruptions of brutality that remind everyone that the peace is temporary, conditional, always one trigger away from chaos. You're in the day room watching television, some mindless sitcom that feels like a transmission from another planet where people have problems that aren't life-threatening. When a fight breaks out over the channel, two inmates who've been feuding over territory or debt or respect, the actual cause doesn't matter because the fight is really about dominance, about establishing hierarchy, about showing everyone watching that you can't be disrespected without consequences. The fight is savage, no rules, no referee, just two men trying to hurt each other as badly as possible before the guards intervene. And they do intervene. Eventually, with pepper spray and batons and backup called from other units, and both fighters are dragged off, leaving blood on the floor that an inmate trustee has to clean up, and the television goes back to the sitcom like nothing happened, laugh track echoing through a room that smells like pepper spray and copper, and you realize that violence here is just background noise, just part of the environment like the concrete and steel, something you learn to tune out because dwelling on it will drive you insane. You start having nightmares, vivid dreams where you're being chased or attacked or trapped, waking up, gasping in your bunk, heart pounding, and Tank tells you to keep it down. Your night terrors are disturbing his sleep, and you try to will yourself not to dream, but that's not how it works. Your subconscious processing trauma in the only way it knows how, replaying and remixing the horrors you've witnessed and experienced into new configurations of fear. The medical care in maximum security is minimal at best, malicious at worst, and you learn this when your split lip gets infected, swelling up hot and painful, and you file a sick call request and wait 3 days for an appointment where a nurse who clearly doesn't want to be there gives you a cursory examination, tells you it's fine, prescribes nothing, and sends you back to your cell, and the infection gets worse until you're running a fever, until Tank complains that you're going to contaminate the cell, until you finally get sent to the infirmary where a doctor who seems competent but overwhelmed gives you antibiotics and a lecture about hygiene, as if you have control over the filthy environment you're forced to live in. You see, the infirmary is its own kind of prison within the prison, beds occupied by inmates recovering from stabbings, beatings, suicide attempts, medical conditions that went untreated until they became emergencies, and you realize that the state's obligation to provide health care is interpreted in the most minimal way possible, treating only what's immediately life-threatening, ignoring chronic conditions, mental health issues, dental problems, anything that costs money but doesn't prevent immediate death, because keeping you alive is required, but keeping you healthy is optional. And the distinction means suffering that could be prevented is just accepted as part of the punishment. 3 months in and you've developed a kind of 1,000-yard stare an emotional flatness that lets you witness horror without reacting, that lets you exist in this environment without constantly being traumatized, a coping mechanism that's probably destroying something essential in your humanity, but that feels necessary for survival. You've learned to sleep through noise, through screaming and fighting and guards doing their rounds. Your body so exhausted from constant hypervigilance that it just shuts down when given the opportunity, though the sleep is never restful, never rejuvenating, just a temporary unconsciousness that leaves you feeling more tired than before. The food continues to be barely edible, but you've stopped tasting it, just shoveling it in for calories. Fuel for a body that's become a vehicle you operate rather than something you inhabit. The disconnect between mind and flesh growing as you learn to ignore pain, ignore discomfort, ignore the physical degradation that comes from this environment. Cortez increases his protection rate, tells you the price has gone up, the yard is more dangerous now, tensions are high between the gangs, keeping you safe requires more resources, and you know it's a shakedown. No, he's exploiting you, but what choice do you have? You pay or you lose protection. And losing protection means becoming a victim again, means opening yourself up to violence and exploitation that could be worse than the financial burden. You witness a race riot, tensions that have been building for weeks finally exploding in the yard, black inmates versus white inmates versus Mexican inmates, alliances and enmities that make no sense to you but that have histories stretching back decades, institutional conflicts that get passed down from generation to generation of prisoners, new inmates indoctrinated into old hatreds, and the violence is massive, coordinated, dozens of people fighting simultaneously while guards scramble to respond, and you find yourself running for cover, pressing yourself against a wall, trying to stay out of it, trying not to get caught up in violence that has nothing to do with you but that could kill you just as dead. The riot lasts 20 minutes before tactical teams bring it under control. Rubber bullets and tear gas and overwhelming force. And the aftermath is brutal. The entire facility goes on lockdown for 2 weeks, everyone confined to cells 23 hours a day, 1 hour out for shower and phone calls, and the isolation is crushing. Being locked in a 6x9 box with Tank, who's increasingly irritated by your presence, the forced proximity wearing on both of you, and you understand why solitary confinement is considered torture, why extended isolation breaks people's minds. Because humans aren't meant to exist in boxes, aren't meant to be cut off from stimulation and social contact. And even the terrible social contact of general population is better than nothing. The lockdown eventually lifts, but things have changed. The administration has cracked down. New rules, more restrictions, fewer privileges, collective punishment for the actions of a few, and you understand that this is how prison works. They control you through the threat of taking away the small comforts you've come to depend on, the television time, the recreation period, the commissary access, holding them hostage to your good behavior, making you complicit in your own oppression by giving you just enough that you have something to lose. 6 months in and you've become someone you don't recognize, someone who can watch violence without flinching, who can ignore suffering because acknowledging it means acknowledging your own vulnerability, who's learned to manipulate and scheme and protect yourself using the same predatory logic that governs this entire institution. You've taken on debt work for Cortez, small tasks that compromise your integrity but that keep you in his good graces, passing messages, holding contraband temporarily, looking away when things happen that you should report but won't because snitching is a death sentence. Literally. Informants get killed in here. their bodies found in places where cameras don't reach, and the guards investigate, but not too hard because they understand that some codes are more powerful than their authority. You've witnessed 3 more stabbings, 2 successful suicides, 1 attempted escape that ended with the guy getting shot off the fence, his body falling 20 feet to land broken on the asphalt, and these deaths barely register anymore. They're just statistics, just events that happen in the background of your own survival struggle. And you hate that you've become so callous, but you also understand that caring too much about others means not protecting yourself, means investing emotional energy you need to reserve for your own battles. The psychology of the prison has infected you. You think in terms of us versus them, inmates versus guards, your race versus other races, your cell block versus other cell blocks, your gang affiliation versus rival gangs, all these artificial divisions that the system encourages because divided inmates are easier to control than unified ones. And you know you're being manipulated, but you participate anyway because not participating means isolation, means vulnerability, means becoming a victim. You've started lifting weights in the yard, building muscle as armor, making yourself harder to victimize physically, and the iron pile comes with its own politics, its own hierarchies, white inmates dominating the weights, enforcing an unwritten schedule where different groups get access at different times, and learning to navigate this requires reading subtle signals, knowing when to step up, when to back down, when to assert yourself and when to defer. The constant calibration, exhausting but necessary. Tank has become something like a mentor, not a friend, never a friend, but someone who occasionally drops knowledge about surviving in here, who tells you that the key is finding your niche, becoming useful to the right people, developing skills that the prison economy values, whether that's legal work, tattoo art, drug trafficking, whatever. You need to be more valuable alive and functional than dead or disabled. And his cynicism is so complete, so matter-of-fact, that it's almost beautiful in its honesty. At least he's not lying to you the way the system does, pretending this is about rehabilitation when it's really just warehousing humans in conditions that would be illegal for animals. The visiting room is a special kind of torture, a place where the outside world intrudes into your prison reality, reminding you of everything you've lost, everything you can't have, all the normal human experiences that are forbidden to you now. Your first visit from family is devastating. Seeing your mother's face aged 10 years from worry, seeing the tears she tries to hide, sitting across from her at a table in a room full of other inmates and their families, guards watching every interaction, no privacy, no real intimacy, just this performance of connection under surveillance. And you want to comfort her, but you're not allowed to touch except a brief hug at the start and end. You want to tell her you're okay, but you're not. You're falling apart, and lying to her face is somehow worse than lying in letters because she can see the truth in your eyes, can see what this place is doing to you. The visit lasts 2 hours, but feels like 2 minutes. Time moving differently when you're desperate to hold on to every second, and when it's over and you're strip searched before being allowed back to your unit, the guards checking every cavity for contraband. The humiliation of the search feels worse than usual because you've just been reminded that you're human, you matter to someone, and then immediately you're treated like an animal, like a threat, like something less than human, and the cognitive dissonance is crushing. You watch other inmates deal with visits in different ways. Some guys get energized by family contact. It reminds them what they're fighting for, what they're surviving for, while others refuse visits entirely, saying it's too painful. Saying goodbye over and over is worse than just accepting you're alone in here, and you understand both perspectives, can see how either choice is a kind of survival strategy. The mail becomes more important after the visit, letters a lifeline to normalcy, but also a weapon the system uses against you because guards read everything looking for contraband plans, coded messages, anything they can use to justify discipline or extended sentences, and you have to censor yourself even in private correspondence. Can't express your real feelings, can't describe the truth of this place, can't say anything that might be used against you. So even your most intimate communications are performances, are strategic, are compromised. You learn that some inmates maintain relationships with people on the outside, romantic partners who stick around despite the years of separation. The collect calls that cost $50 for 15 minutes, the commissary money they send that keeps their incarcerated partner alive, and you marvel at that kind of loyalty, that kind of love. But you also see how the system exploits it, how families bankrupt themselves supporting incarcerated loved ones, how private companies profit from that desperation, charging unconscionable rates for phone calls and video visits and money, transfers, extracting wealth from the poorest communities who can least afford it, the prison industrial complex feeding on human misery in ways that would be illegal in any other context. 9 months in, and the monotony is the worst part, worse than the violence or the fear, the crushing sameness of every day, the absolute lack of control over your environment or schedule or choices, the way time becomes this elastic thing that stretches out infinitely in the present while simultaneously evaporating, months passing in what feels like weeks, weeks feeling like years, the temporal distortion that comes from having no meaningful markers, no holidays that matter, no seasons that penetrate the concrete and steel, just the endless repetition of the same routine in the same space with the same people until you feel like you're caught in a loop, a glitch in reality, living the same day over and over with minor variations that don't actually matter. You've seen inmates lose their minds to the monotony, guys who start talking to themselves, who develop elaborate fantasy worlds to escape the grinding reality, who retreat so far into their own heads that they stop engaging with the physical world entirely, and you understand the impulse, the desperate need to be somewhere else, anywhere else, even if that somewhere is just in your imagination. The education programs that supposedly exist in maximum security are a joke. Overcrowded classes taught by underpaid teachers who've given up materials that are outdated by decades, waiting lists that are years long. And even if you do get into a class, the guards can pull you out at any time for security reasons, for count, for lockdowns, for any of 100 administrative priorities that take precedence over your rehabilitation. Because despite what they say, despite what the mission statements claim, this place isn't about improving you. It's about storing you, keeping you away from society, and whether you come out better or worse is irrelevant to the institution. You've started reading everything you can get your hands on, books from the prison library, which has maybe 3,000 volumes for a population of 2,000 inmates, most of them donated, falling apart, but their escape, their windows to other worlds, other possibilities, and you devour them. Fiction, history, philosophy, anything that takes your mind somewhere else for a few hours, and you understand why literacy programs in prison are so important, why education is the only real path to breaking the cycle, but you also see how the system underfunds and undermines those programs, keeping inmates ignorant and dependent. Because educated inmates are dangerous inmates, they know their rights, they can advocate for themselves, they can organize, and the system can't allow that. You witness the aging inmate population, guys who've been down for 30, 40 years, who are now dealing with chronic health conditions in a medical system that's barely equipped to handle acute care, who are dying in prison from diseases that could be managed on the outside, who will never be released because they were sentenced when the laws were even harsher than they are now, before reforms, before there was any concept of mercy in sentencing. And you see your possible future in their present, see that you could grow old in here, die in here, never experience freedom again, and that possibility is more terrifying than any immediate physical threat. 1 year in and you've survived what most people don't survive. You've made it through the initial adjustment period without getting killed, seriously injured, or completely broken, and that's something, a grim achievement that nobody on the outside would understand or celebrate, but that feels monumental from inside these walls. You've developed a routine that minimizes risk, a network that provides basic protection, a reputation as someone who keeps his head down and doesn't cause problems, which is the best reputation you can have in here, because being notable is dangerous, drawing attention is dangerous. You want to be invisible, forgettable, beneath notice. You've watched the gang dynamics shift, alliances form and break, wars erupt and get negotiated into uneasy truces, all of it happening according to rules you're still learning, and you've managed to avoid getting pulled into the serious violence, the planned hits, the organized conflict, staying neutral through a combination of luck and strategic positioning and Cortez's protection, which you're still paying for, still resenting, but also grudgingly grateful for, because you've seen what happens to unprotected inmates, and it's not pretty. The mental health situation, maximum security, is a crisis that nobody addresses. You're surrounded by people with serious psychological issues, untreated trauma, personality disorders, schizophrenia, and the treatment they receive is medication if they're lucky, isolation if they're not, but no real therapy, no real support, just chemical suppression of symptoms or solitary confinement for behaviors that are really symptoms of illness. And you see how the system creates and exacerbates mental health problems, how the stress and trauma and isolation of prison drive people insane, and then punishes them for being insane. A vicious cycle that destroys minds and lives. You've had to fight once, a situation where backing down would have been worse than fighting, where someone challenged you over something trivial and you couldn't avoid it, and you held your own, took some hits but gave some back, and it ended without serious injury to either party, and the guards wrote you up, gave you time in segregation, 30 days in the hole for fighting, and that month in solitary was the worst experience of your life. 23-hour lockdown in a cell even smaller than your regular one. No human contact except guards passing food through a slot. No books, no television, no stimulation, just you and your thoughts in a concrete box. And you emerged from it different, harder, more damaged, understanding why solitary confinement is classified as torture by international human rights organizations, but still used liberally in American prisons as routine punishment. You've seen the racial dynamics play out in increasingly complex ways. The way that prison gangs are organized largely along racial lines, not because of ideology, but because of protection, because the system pits races against each other, because in a resource-scarce environment where violence is common, people cluster with their own kind for safety, and the administration encourages this division, uses it to maintain control, to prevent solidarity across racial lines that might lead to unified action against the institution itself. 15 months in and you're starting to see the possibility of parole, distant but real, a light at the end of the tunnel that might not be an oncoming train, and you're trying to position yourself for release. taking the classes that look good on a parole application, avoiding write-ups, building a record that shows rehabilitation, even though you know it's mostly performance, mostly checking boxes in a system that doesn't really care whether you've changed as long as you've followed the rules. You've witnessed parole hearings for other inmates, guys who've done everything right, who've genuinely transformed themselves, who present compelling cases for release, and watch them get denied anyway, the parole board citing the nature of their original crime, the victim's family's opposition, public safety concerns that are really just code for we don't want to release you because it's politically safer to keep you locked up, and you understand that your release isn't really about you. It's about politics, about optics, about a system that's built to incarcerate, not to reintegrate. You've started thinking about what happens after, assuming you survive to release, and the statistics are terrifying. 2/3 of released inmates are rearrested within 3 years, not because they're inherently criminal, but because the system sets them up to fail, releases them with no money, no job prospects, no housing, a criminal record that disqualifies them for most employment, no support network, and then act surprised when they end up back inside the recidivism cycle that keeps prisons full and profits flowing to the industries that feed off incarceration. You've seen the effect of long-term incarceration on people's ability to function in normal society, guys who've been down so long they can't handle the simple choices that freedom requires, who panic in open spaces, who can't sleep without the noise and routine of prison, who've become so institutionalized that they commit crimes just to come back because prison is home. It's the only place they know how to exist. And you're terrified that you're becoming one of them, that this place is reshaping your brain in ways that can't be undone, that even if your body leaves these walls, your mind will still be trapped here. Tank is getting released next month, his sentence ending after 12 years, and he's terrified in a way you've never seen him before, the prospect of freedom more frightening than anything inside these walls. And he tells you that he doesn't know how to live out there anymore, doesn't know how to talk to people who aren't inmates or guards, doesn't know how to function without someone telling him when to wake up, when to eat, when to sleep. And you realize that this is what the system does. It breaks you down and rebuilds you in its image, makes you dependent on the structure it provides, ensures that even if you leave, you'll probably come back because you're no longer capable of independence, of self-determination, of the basic life skills that free people take for granted. And watching Tank's fear is like looking in a mirror at your own future, seeing what this place will do to you if you stay long enough, and understanding that there's no good ending here, only degrees of damage, only different flavors of destroyed. 2 years in and you've become a different person entirely. The you that entered this place is dead, replaced by someone harder, colder, more calculating, someone who's learned to survive in an environment that's designed to break human beings down to their component parts and reassemble them into something more manageable for the system. You've developed skills you never wanted. The ability to read violence before it happens, to assess threats in microseconds, to lie convincingly to guards and inmates alike, to manipulate situations to your advantage, to use people and be used in return. All the survival mechanisms that make you functional in here, but that will make you dysfunctional out there, assuming you ever get out there, which feels less certain with each passing day despite the parole possibility looming on the horizon. You've watched the prison population turn over, new inmates arriving with that same terrified confusion you had on day one, and you feel nothing for them. No sympathy, no desire to help, just a cold assessment of whether they'll survive or become victims, whether they'll align with your interests or against them. And you hate this callousness, but you also understand it's necessary. Caring about others in here is a liability. Emotions are weaknesses that get exploited, so you've learned to turn them off, to become the kind of sociopath the system assumes you already are. The corruption is everywhere once you learn to see it. Guards smuggling in drugs and phones and weapons for inmates who can pay. Administrators doctoring reports to make their facilities look safer than they are. Medical staff denying care to save money. Kitchen workers stealing food to sell on the black market. Everyone from the top down is complicit in a system that's rotten to its core, and you've become part of that corruption. Participating in the underground economy because it's the only way to access things you need, the only way to maintain your position, the only way to survive with any measure of dignity or comfort. You've seen the COVID pandemic hit the prison, watched it spread through the population like wildfire because social distancing is impossible in cells designed for 2 but holding 3, because masks and sanitizer were luxuries the administration couldn't be bothered to provide until people started dying, because the outside world's concern for public health didn't extend to inmates. You were left to get sick and recover or die, and the death toll was staggering. Bodies removed in the night, cells sanitized and immediately refilled with new inmates. The system grinding forward without pause, without mourning, without acknowledgement that the people dying were human beings with families and histories and potential for redemption. You've lost people you knew, not friends exactly because you don't allow yourself friends in here, but familiar faces, guys you worked with or lifted weights beside or nodded to in passing, and they're gone now, taken by violence or disease or suicide, and new faces replace them, the population churning. The only constant is the institution itself, the concrete and steel and bars that outlast everyone who passes through them. You've started having physical problems, chronic pain from sleeping on terrible mattresses, dental issues from lack of proper care, digestive problems from years of terrible food, the slow deterioration that comes from existing in an environment that meets the bare minimum standards for keeping you alive but does nothing to keep you healthy. And you know that when you get out, if you get out, you'll be dealing with these health issues for the rest of your life, permanent damage from your time inside, scars that nobody can see but that limit your function, reduce your vitality, age you prematurely in ways that will follow you forever. The parole hearing approaches and you're trying to prepare, trying to figure out what they want to hear. What narrative of rehabilitation will be convincing enough to overcome the political pressure to keep you locked up? And you're working with a volunteer advocate who helps inmates navigate the parole process, and she's kind but realistic. Tells you that your chances are maybe 50-50, that it depends on factors you can't control, the mood of the board members, whether there's been recent crime news that makes them cautious about releasing anyone, whether the victim's family shows up to oppose your release, whether you can articulate remorse and change in ways that satisfy their checklist of rehabilitation markers. You've written and rewritten your statement, the speech you'll give, about what you've learned, how you've changed, what your plans are for reintegration, and it all sounds hollow to you, performative, because the real changes that have happened aren't the kind they want to hear about. You've become harder, not softer, more criminal, not less, better at manipulation and survival and violence, the skills that prison teaches, and claiming you've been rehabilitated feels like the biggest lie you've ever told. But it's a necessary lie, the price of admission to the possibility of freedom. You've seen guys get paroled and come back within months, unable to handle the outside, unable to find work or housing, violated for technical infractions like missing a check-in with their parole officer, and you understand that parole isn't really freedom, It's just a different form of custody. You'll still be property of the state, still subject to rules and restrictions and surveillance, still one mistake away from being thrown back inside to finish your sentence. And the failure rate is so high because the system is designed to fail you, sets impossible conditions, and then punishes you for not meeting them. You've tried to maintain some connection to your family, to keep relationships alive that might provide support when you get out. But it's hard. The distance grows with time. The inability to be present for important moments, birthdays and graduations and weddings and funerals, life happening without you, your family moving on because they have to, because waiting for you means putting their own lives on hold, and you can't ask that of them. So you encourage them to live, to be happy, even as it means you become less relevant, less central to their world, returning after years away to a family that's reorganized itself around your absence. The education you've managed to get in here is limited but real. You've earned a GED, taken some college courses through a correspondence program, learned a trade in the prison workshop, all credentials that might help with employment on the outside, might give you a chance at something other than minimum wage labor or a return to crime. But you also know that employers see your criminal record before they see your qualifications, that the stigma of incarceration follows you forever, that society says it believes in second chances, but rarely actually provides them, preferring to keep you in a permanent underclass, restricted from housing, from voting, from professional licenses, from the full rights of citizenship, a civil death that continues long after your sentence ends. The parole hearing itself is surreal. You're brought into a room where 3 board members sit behind a table, your fate in their hands, and they've got your file in front of them, your entire life reduced to a manila folder, your crime, your conduct reports, your program participation, letters of support and opposition, and they ask you questions in tones that range from neutral to hostile. Why did you commit your crime? What have you done to address the issues that led to your incarceration? What are your plans for housing and employment? How will you avoid reoffending? And you give your rehearsed answers, hitting the points your advocate told you to hit, showing remorse without making excuses, demonstrating insight into your criminal thinking, presenting a realistic reentry plan, and through it all you're trying to read their faces, trying to gauge whether they're buying it, whether you're coming across as genuinely changed or just saying what you think they want to hear. The victim's family is there, sitting in the back of the room, and when they're given the opportunity to speak, they tell the board about their loved one, about the harm your crime caused, about the ongoing trauma they experience, about their fear of you being released, and their pain is real and valid and you feel the weight of it, the understanding that your actions created suffering that can't be undone, that no amount of time in prison can balance that equation, that justice is an impossible concept when it comes to serious harm. There's no making it right, only consequences and suffering on all sides. And you want to apologize, to express remorse directly to them, but your advocate has told you not to speak out of turn. That direct engagement could backfire, so you sit silent, absorbing their pain and anger, adding it to the crushing weight of guilt you carry. The board deliberates and then delivers their decision, and you're granted parole, conditional release with a list of requirements that feels a mile long. You'll report to a parole officer weekly, submit to random drug tests, maintain employment, avoid contact with known criminals, which is complicated when most of your associates are people you met in prison. Stay away from the victim and their family, pay restitution and fees and fines that will take years to discharge. and violating any of these conditions means immediate return to prison to serve the remainder of your sentence. But despite the restrictions, despite the continued surveillance and control, you're getting out, you're going to leave this place, and the relief is overwhelming. Tears streaming down your face. The first real emotion you've allowed yourself to feel in months, maybe years. Because hope is dangerous in prison. It makes you vulnerable. But now hope is real, tangible. You have a date. 3 months from now, you walk out those gates and back into a world you barely remember. The 3 months before release are the longest of your entire sentence. Time slowing to a crawl now that freedom has a specific date, every day dragging, every setback potentially catastrophic. You could still catch a charge, still get into a fight, still do something that jeopardizes your release, so you become even more careful, more withdrawn, counting down days like a mantra, and other inmates treat you differently now. Guys getting out are both envied and resented. You're escaping while they remain trapped, and some people are supportive, offering advice about re-entry, about what to expect, about the challenges you'll face, while others are hostile, angry at your good fortune, and you navigate these dynamics carefully, not wanting to provoke conflict this close to liberation. You're trying to prepare mentally for the outside, but it's impossible. You've been locked up so long that the world has changed. Technology has advanced. Social norms have shifted. Your references are all outdated. You're going to emerge like someone from the past, time traveling forward into a present you don't understand. And the anxiety about this is constant, invasive. You wake up in the night panicking about simple things, how to use a smartphone, how to navigate public transportation, how to interact with people who aren't inmates or guards, all the basic skills of modern life that you've lost or never had. The prison offers a reentry program. It's supposed to prepare you for release, but it's a joke. A few classes about resume writing and interview skills taught by volunteers who mean well but don't understand the reality of trying to find employment with a felony record. And there's nothing about the psychological adjustment, the trauma of incarceration, the difficulty of reintegrating into a society that's made it clear it doesn't want you, that sees you as permanently suspect, permanently dangerous, permanently less than. You've secured housing through a halfway house, a mandatory step in your parole plan, a transitional facility where you'll live with other parolees under supervision, rules and curfews and restrictions. Not freedom exactly, but a step toward it. And you're grateful for it, even as you resent the continued control, the inability to just go home, to be with family, to start fresh without surveillance and structure. You're making lists of things you want to do on the outside, foods you want to eat, places you want to visit, people you want to see, simple pleasures that have been denied for years, and the anticipation is almost painful. You're afraid to want too much, afraid that the reality won't match the fantasy you've built up, that freedom will be disappointing, that you've idealized it in ways that the actual experience can't fulfill because your expectations have been shaped by deprivation. Anything would seem amazing compared to prison, but that doesn't mean it will actually be good. Release day arrives, and it's anticlimactic. You're processed out through the same doors you came in, given the clothes you wore when you arrived, which don't fit anymore. Your body different after years inside. Given a bus ticket and $50 gate money, the state's contribution to your re-entry, barely enough to cover basic needs for a day or two, and then you're standing outside the prison walls, the gates closing behind you, with a finality that's both liberating and terrifying, and you're free, technically, legally, but you don't feel free. You feel exposed, vulnerable, the absence of structure disorienting, nobody telling you when to wake up, when to eat, when to sleep, infinite choices stretching ahead of you, and you're paralyzed by them, standing there on the sidewalk trying to remember how to function as a person who makes decisions. The bus ride to the city where your halfway house is located is overwhelming. The sensory input too much after years in a controlled environment. The noise and movement and variety of people, families and children and couples, normal people living normal lives, and you're among them but not of them, you're other, marked by your experience in ways that might not be visible but feel permanent, indelible, a scarlet letter you carry in your posture, your hypervigilance, your inability to relax even here in the supposed safety of public space. You arrive at the halfway house and it's another institution. More rules, more restrictions, curfews and mandatory meetings and room checks. But at least it's not prison. At least you can walk down the street, go to a store, breathe air that doesn't smell like concrete and bodies, and you're trying to adjust to find your rhythm. But everything is hard. The simple act of buying food at a grocery store is overwhelming. Too many choices, too much abundance after years of scarcity, and you find yourself gravitating toward the cheapest, simplest options, unable to enjoy the variety, because decision fatigue is real and you're exhausted by freedom. The job search is brutal. You apply to dozens of places, entry-level positions that don't require much skill, and you're honest about your record because lying would violate parole, and you watch employers' faces change when they see your conviction. Watch opportunities evaporate. Get told again and again that they'll call you, but they never do. And you understand that the punishment for your crime doesn't end when you leave prison. It follows you forever, limits your options, relegates you to the margins of the economy, and the frustration builds, the anger at a system that demands you support yourself but refuses to give you the tools to do so, that sets you up to fail and then punishes you for failing. 2 months out and you're struggling. You found a job finally, minimum wage labor at a warehouse, physical work that's exhausting but pays just enough to cover your halfway house fees and basic expenses with nothing left over, no savings, no buffer for emergencies, living paycheck to paycheck in a way that feels precarious, unstable, one missed shift away from violating parole conditions, one unexpected expense away from disaster. The psychological adjustment is harder than the practical challenges. You find yourself having panic attacks in crowds, unable to sleep in the quiet of your halfway house room, missing the noise and structure of prison in ways that disturb you. You've been institutionalized despite your resistance, shaped by the experience in ways you didn't want to acknowledge. And you're trying to access mental health services, but the wait list is months long and you can't afford private therapy on your wages. So you're struggling alone, trying to process years of trauma, without support, without guidance, just white-knuckling your way through each day. You're reconnecting with family cautiously. They're supportive, but the relationships are different, strained by distance and time and the weight of what you've been through. You can't talk to them about prison. They don't want to hear it. They want you to move on, to be the person you were before. But that person doesn't exist anymore. You're someone new, someone damaged, and the disconnect is painful, isolating. You're surrounded by people who love you but who can't understand you, who don't know what to do with this version of you that came back from prison. You're avoiding other parolees even though they're the only people who might understand, because association with other felons is a parole violation, because falling back into old patterns is the path that leads back to prison. And you're determined not to go back. You'll do whatever it takes to stay out. But the isolation is crushing. You have no real social network, no friends, no community, just you and your minimum wage job in your halfway house room and the endless requirements of parole supervision. You're testing clean on your drug tests, reporting on time to your parole officer, maintaining employment, checking all the boxes, but you're not okay, you're barely holding it together. The stress and isolation and economic pressure grinding you down, and you understand why the recidivism rate is so high, why 2/3 of people released from prison end up back inside. It's not because they're inherently criminal, it's because the system makes it nearly impossible to succeed, puts up barriers at every turn, offers no real support, just surveillance and restrictions and the constant threat of being sent back, and you're trying to be one of the success stories, one of the 33% who make it, but the odds are stacked against you in ways that feel insurmountable. 6 months out and you've moved from the halfway house to your own apartment, a tiny studio in a bad neighborhood, the only place you could afford, and that would rent to someone with your record. And it's yours, your own space. The first time in years you've had privacy, had control over your environment. And that should feel amazing, but instead it feels lonely, isolating. You come home from work to an empty room with no furniture except a mattress on the floor and a folding chair. No television, no internet, because you can't afford those luxuries. Just you and four walls and the silence that feels oppressive after years of constant noise. You're still working the warehouse job, still barely making ends meet, and you're trying to build something better, taking night classes to learn skills that might lead to better employment, but you're exhausted, working full-time and going to school and trying to stay sane. The grind relentless, and you wonder if this is what life is now, just survival, just getting by. The big dreams you had of redemption and success feeling increasingly unrealistic, unattainable. You've had some wins, small victories that you try to celebrate. You've made it 6 months without a violation. You've maintained employment. You've started saving small amounts of money. You're building a record that might eventually overcome the stigma of your conviction. And your parole officer has noticed, has commented that you're doing well and that validation matters. It's something, a sign that your efforts are visible, that success is possible even if it's slow and difficult. You've started volunteering at a community center that helps at-risk youth, trying to use your experience to help others avoid the path you took, and it's meaningful work. It makes you feel like something good might come from your suffering, like your mistakes might serve as cautionary tale that keeps someone else from making similar choices. And the kids you work with are receptive. They ask hard questions about prison, about crime, about choices and consequences, and you're honest with them, brutally honest, describing the reality in ways that strip away any glamour, any appeal that prison might have in their imaginations. You've been drug tested randomly as required by parole, and you've passed every time, staying clean despite the temptation, despite the stress, despite how easy it would be to self-medicate, to numb the pain and trauma. But you know that's a trap. That one dirty test sends you back to prison. So you resist finding healthier coping mechanisms, exercise and journaling and the volunteer work that gives you purpose. And you're proud of this. It's an accomplishment, proof that you can make good choices, that you're not doomed to repeat the patterns that led to your incarceration. 1 year out, and you're reflecting on the journey, on how far you've come and how far you still have to go. And the picture is mixed. You've survived re-entry, you're housed and employed and compliant with parole, but you're not thriving. You're subsisting, getting by, and the gap between survival and success feels vast, possibly unbridgeable given the obstacles you face. You've noticed changes in yourself, ways that you're different from before prison and different from who you were in prison. You're more patient, more deliberate, more aware of consequences, but you're also more cynical, more distrustful, more damaged. The trauma expressing itself in ways that affect your relationships, your work, your entire approach to life. You've tried dating, but it's complicated. The question of when and how to disclose your conviction, the fear of rejection when you reveal your past and you've been rejected. People who seemed interested suddenly distant when they learn you're a felon and you understand it. You carry baggage that most people don't want to deal with, but it still hurts, still reinforces the sense that you're unworthy of love, of normal human connection. You're still paying restitution and fees, hundreds of dollars deducted from each paycheck, debt to the state that will take years to discharge, and it's frustrating, this ongoing financial punishment that makes it harder to get ahead, harder to save, harder to build the stable life that parole requires, but you keep paying because not paying means violation, means prison. So you sacrifice, live lean, defer any luxuries or comforts. You've had moments where you've wanted to give up, where the grind has felt too much, where going back to crime has seemed easier than the struggle of legitimate poverty. And you understand viscerally why recidivism is so high, why people make choices that seem irrational from the outside but make perfect sense when you're in survival mode, when legal opportunities are scarce and illegal ones are abundant, when the system has made it clear that you're not welcome in straight society, that you'll always be other, always be suspect, always be one mistake away from losing everything. But you haven't given up. You've kept going, showing up to work, attending classes, meeting with your parole officer, doing the work of reintegration even when it feels pointless, even when progress is invisible. And there's something to be said for that persistence, that refusal to quit even when quitting would be easier. And you're trying to find meaning in the struggle, trying to believe that it's building towards something better, that the investment of time and effort will eventually pay dividends in the form of a stable life, a clean record, a future that's not defined entirely by your past. 18 months out and you're still navigating the complexities of parole supervision, still living under restrictions that limit your freedom, still checking in weekly with your parole officer, still subject to warrantless searches and surveillance, still one violation away from going back, and the stress of this is constant background radiation that affects everything you do, every choice you make filtered through the question of how it might be perceived, how it might jeopardize your parole status. You've seen other parolees go back, guys you met in the halfway house who violated for various reasons, missing appointments, dirty drug tests, new arrests, technical violations for things that wouldn't be crimes for anyone else but that are violations of parole conditions. And each time someone goes back, it reinforces how fragile your freedom is, how conditional, how easily lost. And it makes you more careful, more paranoid, more isolated, because avoiding risk means avoiding people and situations that might lead to problems. You've achieved a degree of financial stability, been promoted at the warehouse to a supervisor position with slightly better pay, and you're proud of this, its progress, recognition of your work ethic and reliability, and the extra money allows you to buy furniture, to afford internet access, to have some small luxuries that make life more bearable, and you're building credit, establishing a financial identity beyond your criminal record, creating a paper trail that shows responsibility and stability. You're thinking about the future now in ways you couldn't before, making plans that extend beyond just surviving the next week or month, considering going back to school full-time, maybe getting a degree that would open doors to better employment, or learning a skilled trade that pays well and has demand. And these thoughts feel dangerous, feel like tempting fate, because hope can be crushing when it's disappointed. But you're allowing yourself to hope anyway, carefully, guardedly, trying to believe that your life can be more than just the sum of your worst mistakes. You've reconciled somewhat with the person you were before prison, integrated that past self with who you are now, understanding that you contain multitudes, the person who made terrible choices and hurt people and deserved punishment, and also the person who's trying to do better, who's learned and grown and changed. And neither version is complete without the other. You can't pretend the crime didn't happen, but you also can't let it be the only thing that defines you. You have to hold both truths simultaneously, the guilt and the growth, the harm you caused and the good you're trying to do now. 2 years out and you're approaching the end of parole supervision, the light at the end of this particular tunnel finally visible, real, and you're trying to stay focused to not mess up this close to freedom, to complete your sentence without violations, to earn discharge from parole and the restoration of at least some of your rights. And the anticipation is building. The counting down familiar from your approach to release from prison, time taking on that elastic quality again where days drag but weeks fly. You've built a life that's modest but real. You have stable housing and employment. You've completed your restitution payments. You've maintained sobriety and avoided new arrests. You've checked every box that parole required, and you're proud of this achievement even as you recognize how low the bar is. Proud that you've done what the majority of people released from prison cannot do. You've survived re-entry. You're one of the success stories, even if your success looks like poverty and struggle to anyone who hasn't experienced incarceration. You're thinking about the person you were when you entered maximum security, that terrified, confused individual who had no idea what he was walking into, who wouldn't have survived today without luck and protection and the brutal education that prison provides. And you're grateful you're not that person anymore, even as you mourn the innocence you lost, the naivety that got stripped away, the softness that got hardened into something more durable but less human. You understand now why you wouldn't survive a day in maximum security, not the you reading this, the comfortable person who's never been locked up, who has freedom and choices and control over their environment. That person would be destroyed by the reality of prison, by the violence and degradation and psychological warfare, by the grinding monotony and constant threat, by the dehumanization that's baked into every aspect of the institution. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the suffering is the purpose. Punishment without redemption, vengeance without end. A system designed not to improve people but to break them, to extract pain as payment for crimes. And it works. It absolutely works. People come out of maximum security damaged in profound ways, traumatized and hardened and often unable to reintegrate into society, and then society acts surprised when they fail, when they return to crime, when they end up back inside, as if the system wasn't designed to produce exactly that outcome, as if recidivism isn't the predictable result of an approach to justice that prioritizes punishment over rehabilitation, that offers no real support for reentry, that labels people as felons for life and then limits their opportunities in ways that make legitimate success nearly impossible. And you've beaten those odds. You've made it out and stayed out, but you're under no illusion that this is because you're special or strong or particularly deserving. You're lucky you had just enough support and just enough opportunities and just enough resilience to survive a process that's designed to fail people, and you carry with you every day the memory of those who didn't make it, the guys who died inside, who gave up, who went back, who are still there grinding through their sentences in maximum security prisons across the country, and you know that you wouldn't survive going back, that you've used up your allotment of resilience, that if you violate and get sent back, it would destroy you completely. So you stay vigilant, stay compliant, keep moving forward, because stopping means falling backward into a system that's always ready to reclaim you, to pull you back into its machinery of punishment and control. And maybe that's the final lesson of maximum security, not that you're reformed or rehabilitated or better than you were, but that you're scared enough, damaged enough, determined enough never to go back. And if fear of return is what keeps you from committing new crimes, then the system has achieved its goal, not through any moral improvement, but through trauma, through breaking you down so thoroughly that the prospect of reincarceration is worse than any struggle freedom presents. And you live with that knowledge, that fear, that understanding that your freedom is conditional, provisional, always subject to revocation, and you're grateful for it anyway, grateful to be out here struggling instead of in there surviving, grateful for choices, even when they're all hard choices, grateful for poverty and stress and isolation, because at least they're yours. At least you're experiencing them in freedom rather than confinement. And that's something, that's everything. That's the difference between existing and living. And you're trying to live, finally, really live. Not just survive, but build something, contribute something, be someone beyond your conviction, beyond your prison number, beyond the worst thing you ever did. And whether you'll succeed is uncertain, the future opaque. But you're here, you're out, you're trying, and after everything you've been through, after the maximum security experience that was designed to destroy you, that's its own kind of victory. Small and fragile and hard-won, but real and yours, and worth fighting to keep.